how do I get the most for my family? How do I get the most from my situation? Natural question. So factors to consider when claiming your benefits. It's important to note that you take into consideration, retirement goals, your current health, family health history, retirement, your other assets, retirement assets such as 401ks and IRA accounts, pensions, and other reliable income that you expect to have coming in every month, potential or expected changes, your longevity, your needs, your budget. A good financial advisor can be essential in helping filter through all the options you have for retirement income. And keep in mind, Social Security Administration cannot give you personalized advice or guide you to coordinate your election with other assets. So getting the most for your situation, here's some thoughts. Delay claiming until later using your tax deferred IRA or 401k accounts first. That's something you can absolutely do. And you need an analysis of this to really see how it can impact you from paying less taxes perspective, as well as a account longevity and a principal protection type standpoint. This would allow you, because if you can do this, this allows you to your Social Security to gain a guaranteed 8% increase per year, like we saw with the delayed retirement credits, and have that larger amount increase because of cost of living adjustments between, as well as a larger amount getting those cost of living adjustments in the future. Then what you do is you couple your Social Security benefits and your various withdrawals at age 70 to essentially, once you turn on the larger benefit, to essentially gain a more tax efficient income for the rest of your life. It's critical to get competent, experienced guidance here so you can make a confident, sound decision, because you properly blend the accounts and withdrawal strategies from all the different places where you've saved and all the different sources of income that you've acquired, and you can align those to use different vehicles as well as specific estate planning solutions where they're appropriate. Consider where different assets are going to be held in different accounts, and do that on top of maximizing Social Security. That's actually what helps you create and maximize the retirement income that you're looking for your household. And that actually gets me to a really, really important point that I'm going to try to make very quickly. Do you own risk type assets like mutual funds and some of those other accounts? You probably do. You probably have. Have you ever heard of phantom income tax before, or phantom income taxation? Maybe not. Most people haven't. Well, this can impact and tie into your Social Security being taxed. And this can impact Roth conversion calculations. And in general, it can cost you a lot without even knowing about it. And most people aren't even told about it. So here's an example. Let's assume back in 2018, you invested $500,000 in mutual funds, and your account went down 10% that year. You might remember in December, there was a big hiccup in the market in 2018. So let's just say that you lost 50 grand and now you're left with $450,000. You're a little frustrated. You're okay, buy and hold, not ready to retire yet. But then you get a tax bill. You get a tax bill from the fund. And what happened was you get a 1099 from the mutual fund company with dividends and capital gains that by law you have to recognize as income. That 1099 puts perhaps 20 grand of income on your income tax return, possibly costing you $3,000 in taxes. And on paper, you lost money that year, yet you paid taxes on it. Your account's down 50 grand, but you get this 1099 of $20,000 and you have to pay taxes on it. How's that happen? Essentially, here's what happened. When the mutual fund manager buys and sells shares throughout the course of the year, it creates taxable events for the owner of that fund, an investor in that fund. Mutual fund manager is just doing his job, buying stocks, selling stocks, moving things around. That's called fund turnover. And the changes to the fund's net asset value, which is your investment value, it can't simply offset those just because that net asset value goes down. So even if the fund's value went down, there was transactions throughout the course of the year that were taxable. And the fund manager passes those off to the fund investor. So you get a 1099 on an account whose value dropped. On paper, you lost money for the year, but you still pay taxes on it. Now, the fund manager is just doing his job. He's not going to protect you from this or warn you about it. Investors like yourself typically aren't making quarterly payments on tax that they don't even know they're going to owe. And CPAs don't often catch this because they just report it. They just see the 1099, put it on the form, and they say, hey, you owe a couple grand. But phantom income is actually very easy to identify, and you can control it in several ways. You can eliminate it by using deferral strategies. You can offset it by selling a stock at a loss, or you can eliminate risk and avoid it entirely one of the takeaways here is if you decide to take me up on a discovery call, and which is not the initial, am I ready to retirement call? It's beyond that, but it's a step right behind that initial call. But when we look to identify the actual areas, when we dig deep, roll our sleeves up, and we look to identify the areas where money's falling through the cracks for you, we're going to ask for things like a few years tax returns. Why? Because we want to look at this. We want to be able to find the phantom income tax on a tax return and identify if something like this is actually happening to you. Because if there's ways that you can reduce or avoid unnecessary costs like this, wouldn't you want to reduce it? You know, if you had $3,000 unnecessary costs, wouldn't you want to reduce that or eliminate that? Especially if it's taxes on an account that would go down. You know, this is called phantom income taxation, and it's something to be aware of, something that's often not being taught about. You know, here's another item. What's the best way to create paychecks in retirement, especially since we're talking about Social Security? You know, one of the most important decisions you'll ever have to make is planning for 30 to 40 years of income in retirement and what sources to take that from. You go from working for paychecks to creating paychecks. And that's why the Social Security piece that we've been talking about is incredibly vital. You know, remember the average portion of income that Social Security creates for retirees is somewhere in that 30 to 40%. You know, the rest comes from other places. And in almost every case, we're planning on to create paychecks from our retirement account. So how do you do this? And let me prep you for this. It's not as easy to create paychecks from your retirement accounts as it is to save your paychecks into your retirement accounts. But I don't want to just tell you that. I want to show it to you. You know, so what's Wall Street's answer to creating retirement paychecks? Let's take a look. You know, overall, over the years, the general practice has been to develop a portfolio of stocks and bonds and withdraw a certain percentage each year. And back in 1972, an economist named Henry Markowitz, he won a Nobel Prize for financial analysis. And essentially one of his things he found was this efficient frontier things. It looks like an upside down Nike swoosh, but what it tells us and what he found was that a mix of different investments is actually beneficial and more advantageous than just having one or the other. You know, the eye opener was that, you know, if we consider bonds safer, and if we consider equities riskier or stocks riskier, it wasn't just a linear correlation where it's safety over here and riskiness up here. There was a beneficial nature where you could increase return and decrease your risk by actually adding some stocks to a bond portfolio, right? It was eye-opening. You know, even back then when bonds were performing 9, 10, 11, 12%, you know, adding some stocks to that portfolio actually reduced the risk and increased the yield. You know, so that's why, fast forward to today, that's why our portfolios are broken up into stocks and bonds, and then there's asset mixes, and you make sure you do some risk alignment work, and we can get into a couple other theories that we won't go into right now. It's for a different talk, but you know, it's important to understand that we're broken up into stocks and bonds. Well, you've likely heard of this thing called the 4% rule. 4% rule came from some of this historical analysis, and the quick story is, and this is very important, the 4% rule was a rule of thumb. It was created back in the 90s by a guy named Bill Bengen's office was in San Diego. And his credit, you know, he labeled the rule after he analyzed a number of factors. He looked back over 30-year rolling periods all the way back to 1926, and he was trying to give a rule of thumb to retirees. He was trying to give a rule of thumb to this first generation of folks to truly retire on their 401ks. And he found through this analysis that if a retiree only took out 4% of their portfolio, adjusted it for inflation, it should be able to make that money last for the rest of their lifetime. You know, that person that he was recommending this to, that, you know, the rule of thumb would say that you have about a 6% chance of running out of money during every time. I mean, from the outside perspective, that sounds pretty good. You know, over 94% chance of surviving your portfolio, surviving 30 plus years, sounds pretty good. You know, historically, that had a chance to work. But I emphasize the word historically, because when we use the 4% rule for retirement distributions and we look at historical returns, that would be this blue line up here. There's that 96% chance he was talking about, 94 to 96% chance. You know, if we can invest in any time in history, we'd have a very high probability of success. However, if we use a forward-looking model, the red line, the one right here, meaning we're investing in today's environment, today's interest rate environment, not any other time in history, That's a question for you. When do you get to invest? Some other time in history, or do you get to invest today? Do you get to invest in someone else's bonds back when they were yielding 9, 10, 11, 12%? Or do you get to invest in bonds today where they're yielding like 2? Using a forward-looking model, using today's interest rate environment, we get a very different outcome because bonds are yielding so poorly comparatively to history. You need more and more equity exposure. Notice that you need more and more equity exposure in here just to try to get a 50% shot at a portfolio of 4% withdrawals lasting over 30 years. You got about a 50% chance, 50-50 shot of making it without running out of money to create paychecks for 30 years. Is anybody surprised by that? Is anybody surprised at the difference here? I mean, you should be. Why? Why should you be surprised by this? I mean, everyone's telling you the 4% rule, 4% rule, 4% rule. By the way, the guy who actually created or invented that rule of thumb, Bill Bengen, he denounced the rule back in 2013. He recognized it was just an observation back in the 90s. It wasn't a law of gravity. It's not a law that's applicable always. It was just an observation based on something he saw in 1992. Are we in a different world than we were back in 1992? I mean, we are. So it would be good for us to understand this and be intelligent. You see, these updated insights come from some very, very intelligent people. Not only did Bill Bengen kind of retract his 4% rule, but these guys, Blanchett, Finke, Fowl, they're leaders they work for leading organizations. They're leaders thought leaders in the retirement investment space. And quite frankly, these guys have opened up my eyes and collaboratively written papers that every advisor on the planet should be paying attention to, although they don't. And every person who, just like you, who's retiring should be paying attention to, although they don't. How could they if information like this wasn't brought to your attention? So what are these papers saying? Essentially, they're saying in a low return environment, just like we talked about, the interest rate and bond environment that we're in right now, which is incredibly challenging. I don't even have time to get into that. But retiring in this environment is going to be very, very, very difficult and not like it's been historically. So what's the other lever you can pull, right? So we're saying if it's not 4% withdrawals, what can we do? Well, aside from shifting from stocks to bonds, the lever you can pull is to reduce distributions. In other words, according to Wall Street says, oh, that 4% rule, you can listen to it, but it's kind of risky now, so spend less. Spend less, right? So take a look at this, or chase a higher balance to try to take these lower distributions out. Essentially the target probability of success, that's what POS stands for on the side, target probability of success for a 60% equity allocation over 30 years. Now they're saying if you take out 4.2, it's around a 50% success rate. That's what we just saw a few moments ago. So how do you get it back up into the 90s? You got to take less than 3% out. You have to drop your distributions down to 2.8 just to get the probability of success up above 90. Essentially, you have to spend less of your hard-earned money. This is one of the critical reasons why it's important to get these dependable income sources down pat. Let me give you a little more insight on this. Here's Jack Bogle. For office in downtown, you guys know Vanguard's right down the road. Here's Jack Bogle, founder of Vanguard. He passed away a few years ago, and he was a leader in the industry. I like a lot of what he did. If we're talking about investments, we're talking about keeping our fees down because it keeps more money in your investment accounts and allows you to be positioned to do better. He said some great things, but he also said some things that are not as great. And I want to begin to share with you where we can separate where some of the truth is from where there's some things that are just not true and essentially help you figure out what's applicable to you. Here he was on CNBC being interviewed, and the anchor says, so Jack, you say to prepare for at least 2 declines of 25 to 30%, maybe even 50% in the coming decade. For a buy and hold guy, that's a little concerning. And Jack says, no, not at all. They come and go. The markets go up and the markets go down. It's never failed to recover from one of those 50% declines, right? Never failed. Is this good advice? Well, let's see. This is not a picture of a Richter scale. This is the S&P going all the way back, before the 60s. And in it, you can see what was our dot-com bubble. You can essentially, we got a little bit later, all the way up here. We're up here in March, and here's what happened in March, and here's where we are now. That's a coronavirus right here. Crashed back earlier last year, and where we are right now. and you probably see a pattern that's developed here. I'm going to call it the W times, kind of use W because we don't know what is going to happen next moving forward. I vote that it goes up. I vote that it keeps going way up. For your accounts and my account, that's my vote. But here's the truth. What goes up also comes, you can finish the sentence, it comes down. We need to be aware of that. We need to be conscious of that. I guarantee you over the next 20 to 30 years, there's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, hopefully no world wars. But let's use this to talk about the difference between what happens while we're saving for retirement and what happens when we're spending and creating paychecks in retirement. This is where we can see when Jack Bogle's advice works and when Jack Bogle's advice can be very costly, right? So let's just say you had $500,000 to invest and you had a 30-year timeline, 30 years down here, $500,000, 30 years time. And using history as a guide, this is market returns from 1980 to 2009, right? So at the end of 30 years, we got $5.1 million, right? Now let's look a little bit more closely at our numbers. Let's say, oh man, we had a little bit of a downturn here. I wish I had taken a couple dollars out and pulled them on the sideline, or even if I missed that one, man, I really should have pulled some money out here and missed this a little bit, and then point it back in. Try to time the market, which, as we hopefully know, is virtually impossible. Even the best of the best have difficult times getting it. You have to get right twice: time when to get out and when to get in. So maybe our 5.1 will be 6 million or 6.9 if I had just gotten some of that money out. But we averaged 9.58 over those 30 years, and we turned our $500,000 into 5.1 million bucks. Not too bad, right? We take that. It's a good return. So let's just say Jack Bogle's right. Buy and hold. He's a buy and hold guy. Buy and hold and pray. Hope everything will be okay. That's kind of what we say. And what we do is we kind of see that 5.1, and let's just say over the next 10 years and beyond, right? We do the inverse here. We take the returns, the last 10 years, and we kind of like make them the first 10 years up in our example, and then kind of just reverse the order all over down. We see something pretty fascinating I want to show you, right? $500,000 still turns in to 5.1. There's a mathematical principle here. It's called the commutative principle of math. Essentially, it says that as long as the numbers in the equation are the same, it doesn't matter which order they're in, front to back or back to front. At the end of the timeline, we're going to have the same result. 9.58 average, 9.58 average, $500,000 start, 5.1 at the end, same result. When you're younger, you take more risk with your money. That's why you have time on your side. That's kind of like the rule of thumb. This is how it works when you're saving. But things completely change when you start to spend. So now we get into the distribution or the spending phase. So, okay, we got our $500,000. We're taking $25,000 out annually, and we're going to increase that 3% every single year in order to keep up with cost of goods, cost of living. I mean, if the account's been averaging 9.58% over time, so that means roughly on $500,000, just shy of 10%, to grow by just about 50 grand using simple math. And if we're only taking $25,000 for income, I mean, we should be fine. So we got our $500,000. We get a 25% increase on the account. We take our 25 grand. That's wonderful. Next year, the market goes down by just about 10%, but we got to take 25,750, and that's how it's going to go. So anyway, we get all the way down to these deeper years down here, and guess what? We did the increases on income, and everything worked out, and ultimately we end up with 1.9 million bucks. Right? Let me just click through this, get to the point where taking out 25, we got $1.9 million. This is when everyone says, yeah, sign me up for that, because we went through some horrible bear markets and we had more at the end than we started with, right? So sign me up for that, no problem, because they never failed to recover. These assets never failed to recover from these down markets, right, Jack Bogle? Right? So let's just do an inverse to these numbers like we showed before and see what happens to these figures. Whoa, wait a second. What just happened here? Oh, wait, the commutative principle of mathematics no longer applies. Why? Because we're taking money out, because we're spending from these accounts. Here we just, all we did was reverse everything just like we did before, but now it doesn't apply because we're taking money out. We're taking that 25 grand that we want to create paychecks with every single year. So, the first year here we got our 500 grand and it goes up by over 20 grand and or 20%, and we take our money out and, market went up, account went up. But the very next year, the market crashed by 38% and our 586 loses 38%, but our income plan required us to still take money out and increase that. So we took out 25,750. And let me tell you, when you're early on in retirement and you got some stuff you want to do, it's really hard to get people to cut back. It's really hard to cut back because you've been waiting a long time. You've been being patient. There's trips you want to take. You want that new bike, that new mountain bike. You want a couple different things. You want to spoil the grandkids. You want to take them to Disney World. Whatever it is, there's stuff you're going to do. And the problem is we see an incredible erosion process, even here in year two. We started at 586 and we ended with 344. Let me just tell you, that's going to cause a lot of people to freak out. It's going to cause anybody to freak out. And that was just 1 year into this example. Well, what ends up happening is even after a few good years when you're inclined to try to gain back some of the losses, possibly take on more risk, we hit another rough run of numbers. And now you can see that we have about 148 grand right at the end here of 10 years. Do we know we're going to run out of money? Yep. Has it been only 10 years into our plan? Yep. It's a very scary thing. And so in this example, the folks run out of money in year 18 right into year 19, right? Let me tell you, retirement and income planning is not actually about the day you run out of money. It's about the pain and the process and the anxiety of getting there. It's not comfortable be sitting around when you had 586 at one point, and then at the end of the next year you got 340, and at the end of the year after that you got 329. That could be very, very bad, that erosion process, and it would be difficult. A lot of families are going to be faced with this as they go forward. This exact situation, it's just math. It's not a matter of opinion. It's just math. You can decide if it's important or not. Buy, hold, park, pray, hope everything will be okay, or are there better strategies that you can take advantage of? And I can tell you, there are. Come through a process. I invite you to an "Am I ready to retire?" conversation. And then if we see value there, we can get into full roll up our sleeves and do discovery process with you. We'll help you coordinate all this stuff. It was said there was a quote that I saw that said it very well. He said, you can be young without money, but you can't be old without it, right? When you're young without money, you can eat ramen noodles and sleep on someone's couch and sleep in the basement. When you're old without money, you're not sleeping on the couch. You're not eating a bunch of ramen. Your body's going to revolt. Your body's going to revolt on that. It doesn't work like that. We have to be set up a different way when we step into that spending plan of life or that spending phase, creating paychecks with our money. So would this be one of those things you'd absolutely have to know before you made retirement investing decisions? Could it impact your accounts or cost you money or enjoyment if you missed it? So what's my point? My point that you'll take away from this is that most people don't have, it by now, a process, checklist, outline to follow. They don't know what questions to ask or what to Google search to identify all the critical facts necessary in order to make a sound financial decision that's in their best interest. You're smart people. You want to make good decisions. You want to be put in the position, but you need to be put in that position to make good decisions. And who's helping you identify that? So what happens? Who knows what's going to happen next? Do you know how it's going to happen next? Do you know when the markets are going to drop? Do you know if your income plan is going to work out? Do you know how the tax codes are going to change over time and what they're going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Do you know how the taxation system is going to affect you and your ordinary income and the income you're pulling out of your accounts and your Social Security benefits and the variety of different things that are going on? Maybe not. We all have this wish in life that life just does this nice straight line, a smooth line, a linear ride, a smooth ride, and it's trending upward ideally, right? But that's not life. That. Life is like this. Everything's going to be real smooth, right? Until you get gone out into this ditch and then have to build a bridge, and then you're building a boat and floating across the river, and then finally you think you're there, but you're not, and then you have to climb this ladder in the rain. Life, things are going to go up and things are going to go down. So the point is that we want to mitigate a lot of these risks, know what's coming, know what could come, and mitigate these risks as much as possible to position you to lead your family for a bright future. So who's looking out for you? Did you know how all of your assets fit together with the entitlements like Social Security and pensions to create the income you need to fund your quality of life and retirement? You probably heard me say earlier, after age 50, you need more than a pie chart. You need a plan, a real plan. Who's looking out for you? Both Vanguard and Morningstar have independently on their own released studies that quantify the value of an advisor and the value an advisor can provide well beyond a diversified pie chart of asset classes. And what do we pick? Small cap, large cap, overseas, international, S&P, that kind of stuff. Morningstar said using improved here it is. Morningstar said using improved methods as suggested. Some of the stuff we've talked about today. Now, other things that go well beyond this class, we can talk about them in a phone call. Improved methods could boost retirement accounts by as much as 22.6 or can add 10 additional years of income. So is it important that you might find a more optimal way of doing things instead of just being a pie chart that was diversified? 10 additional years, that could be significant to many people. That's the difference between success or failure, or passing off more money to the next generation, or setting up a spouse who could potentially have very, very significant longevity to be able to accomplish all these goals. So a critical question: if there was a piece of missing information that was costing you money now, or could cost you significantly more in the future, when would you want to know about it? It's a real question. When? Now? Later? Never? Like we joked about earlier, so you don't have to face it. Of course you want to find out sooner, right? That's what we want to do. So for most people, the problem is that they don't have a process, a checklist, and outline. They don't have the things to follow to know which questions to ask to identify all the critical facts in order to make sound planning decisions that are in their best interest. So guys, it's about process. Are any of your financial decisions based on myths, misconceptions, incorrect or incomplete facts? If we don't have the right process, our outcomes will be different than what the right solution will potentially look like, right? So here's an invitation. Schedule an Am I Ready to Retire discovery call. You're smart people. You want to make smart decisions. You want to do the right thing for your family, but how can you when you don't have all the facts, or you don't have a process to sift through and identify the facts and make sound decisions, understanding how everything works together? This isn't a request. I'm not making a request here to give you a second opinion. Run-of-the-mill advisors and the big name broker dealers that you see on TV and hear about, they ask you to get a second opinion so they can push their products. Everyone thinks I'm walking into one more sales pitch, because anyone in the industry can give you their opinion. My point is, if you have all the facts on the table and you've removed misconceptions as much as possible, and you've controlled emotion, and you use logic, and you have a process, you can arrive at a sound decision that's in your best interest. You can arrive at that decision that's in your best interest. And by the end of a discovery meeting where we rolled up our arms, you'll have your own second opinion. You'll have that second opinion based on facts, So if you were making a major financial decision, and I was aware, I'm just going to shift the perspective here. If you were making a major decision and I was aware of something that was detrimental to you or something that was in your best interest, wouldn't you agree that sharing that knowledge with you would be my first priority as a fiduciary advisor? Yep. If you made past decisions based on myths and misconceptions, it's a great indication that you could benefit from our 3-step review. It's a cursory, I'll just tell you a little tiny bit about it. It's a cursory 3-step review that identifies these things so that I can open your eyes to the fact that there's something going on that can be causing you to have money fall through the cracks, or to be losing or costing you money. It's a proactive income tax review where there's tax forward planning, not just tax reporting. That's what the CPAs do, the tax reporting. This is forward-looking planning. Income planning and analysis, where we look at systematic and sustainable withdrawal rates, is just one of the examples there. And really, truly looking at risk exposure and evaluating that, and helping you understand is it makes sense for me to stick my neck out that far if I'm only going to get, so all of this is meant to keep money from falling through the cracks.